So, let's talk about a name you've probably heard, Typhoid Mary. Right away you picture some kind of monster, right? A walking biohazard. But what if I told you that woman, the villain from our public health nightmares, she never really existed? The real story is about a woman named Mary Mallon, an immigrant cook who got caught in this perfect storm of a terrifying new scientific idea, total public panic, and a system that was stretched to its absolute limit.
To really get her story, you have to picture New York City in the early 1900s. Typhoid fever was this terrifying, often deadly disease. But officials were stumped by a string of outbreaks happening in wealthy homes. It wasn't the usual suspects, like bad water or spoiled food. It was like a phantom was moving through the city, leaving sickness and death behind, but with no obvious source. The big question was, how do you fight a killer that you can't even see?
And this is where the whole thing really turns into a detective story. This isn't just about a disease, it's one of the first great epidemiological manhunts, a search for a human source that would literally change public health forever.
Just look at this timeline. Between 1900 and 1907, you have these seemingly random typhoid outbreaks hitting one rich family after another across New York. For years, nobody could connect the dots. One healthy, well-to-do household after another would just suddenly get sick. Turns out, the one thing linking all of them was something they never would have guessed. They had all, at different times, hired the exact same cook. And what was really going on? Well, it all came down to this brand new and, frankly, super unsettling scientific idea: the asymptomatic carrier. The concept that a totally healthy-looking person could be walking around feeling fine, but secretly spreading a deadly disease. I mean, can you imagine trying to explain that to someone? To tell them, hey, you feel great, but you're actually a danger to everyone around you. It was a mind-bending and honestly terrifying idea back then.
So this one guy, a sanitary engineer named George Soper, he's the one who starts to crack the case. And he follows the trail of evidence, not to a dirty well or a bad shipment of food, but to one single person, an Irish immigrant cook named Mary Mallon.
And you know, what Soper did was pretty brilliant for his time. He wasn't just guessing here. He painstakingly traced every single outbreak. He got the employment records for all the household staff, and he matched them up with the timelines of when people got sick. He was using data like a modern-day disease detective. And he found the one constant: Mary Mallon. The final piece of the puzzle was getting biological proof, which he did. It confirmed she was actively shedding the typhoid bacteria. And this method, it pretty much became the playbook for how we track diseases even today.
But you've got to see it from Mary's side for a second. She felt perfectly fine. No fever, no aches, no symptoms at all. This complex science they were throwing at her was totally abstract. And look, as a working-class immigrant woman, cooking wasn't just a job for her, it was how she survived. So when the health officials came and told her she had to stop cooking, they weren't just taking away a paycheck, they were taking away her entire way of life, with zero support offered.
So once they had the scientific proof, the authorities came down, and they came down hard. And the decision they made would send shockwaves through public health and the law, setting this incredibly powerful and frankly frightening precedent.
In 1907, the police showed up. They forcibly took Mary Mallon from her home and shipped her off to an isolation cottage on North Brother Island, this little speck of land in the East River. No trial, no jury, just gone. For 3 years.
Now, she did eventually get out. She actually sued for her freedom and was released on the condition that she would never, ever work as a cook again. But what was she supposed to do? The only job she could find, like being a laundress, paid next to nothing. It wasn't enough to live on. So eventually, she changed her name and went back to the only thing she knew how to do.
And tragically, it happened again. In 1915, she caused another big outbreak, this time at a maternity hospital. After that, they sent her right back to North Brother Island. And this time, there was no getting out. She stayed there in quarantine for the next 23 years. 23 years. Right up until the day she died.
And their story just lays bare this massive conflict, right? On one side, you have the government's duty to protect public safety from a deadly illness. On the other, you have Mary Mallon, a woman who hadn't committed a crime, essentially handed a life sentence without ever seeing the inside of a courtroom. Her case forced America to ask a question it had never really faced head-on before. Where do you draw the line between protecting the community and completely destroying a person's freedom?
But here's the thing. If we just stop the story there, with Mary as this tragic figure who had to be sacrificed for the greater good, we're missing the real point. Because making her the scapegoat, it let everyone ignore the much, much bigger problem and the real solution.
Okay, check this out. While Mary is locked away on that island, look what happens to typhoid rates across New York City. They absolutely plummet. But it wasn't because they'd locked up one person. The drop was massive, citywide. So if it wasn't her imprisonment that stopped the disease, what was it?
The real hero of this story wasn't a person at all. It was infrastructure. New York was finally building modern sewer systems, filtering the city's water, pasteurizing milk, and regulating food safety. These huge, systemic changes did way more to stop typhoid than locking up one woman ever could. See, her isolation was like putting a tiny Band-Aid on a gaping wound, when what was really needed was major surgery on the whole system.
And get this, the way they treated her was totally not the norm. Health officials found other healthy carriers of typhoid around the same time, but many of them were men or from better-off families. And they weren't locked away for life. No, they were monitored, taught hygiene rules, even helped to find new jobs that wouldn't put others at risk. So let's be real. Mary's fate had just as much to do with who she was, a poor, single, immigrant woman, as it did with the germs she carried.
But here's the twist in all this. Mary Mallon's tragic life wasn't for nothing. The absolute injustice of what happened to her actually became the building block, the very foundation for the ethical public health systems that we rely on today.
She became what ethicists call a foundational negative exemplar. That's really just a fancy way of saying her story is the ultimate what not to do guide. It shined a giant spotlight on this huge ethical black hole in public health. The system had the power to find a threat, but it had no rules, no playbook for how to handle that threat in a way that was fair or humane.
And you can draw a straight line from her case to the rules we have today. The right to a legal review, the idea that the response has to be proportional to the risk, forcing authorities to use the least restrictive option, providing compensation for lost work, making sure isolation orders aren't just indefinite. These fundamental safeguards, they exist because of what she went through.
So in the end, Mary Mallon's story is so much more than just some historical horror show. It's a living lesson. She forced us to see the blurry line between protection and punishment. And her case makes us ask a question that is still so relevant every time a new health crisis comes along. When we're faced with an invisible threat, and fear is pushing us to take extreme measures, how do we make sure that we build our response with the compassion, fairness, and safeguards that Mary Mallon never had?